Thomas Mackenzie had faced difficult decisions before, but none quite like this. Standing in his barn, watching the young Apache woman cradle her crying infant, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. The territorial authorities would expect him to report any Apache presence on his land. But something deep in his chest rebelled against the idea. The woman's name, he would later learn, was Ayana, which meant eternal blossom in her language. But in that moment, she was simply a desperate mother who had chosen his barn as a refuge for herself and her child. Thomas made a decision that surprised even himself. "Stay," he said quietly, then repeated it in the few Apache words he knew. The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. Thomas gestured toward the hay where she had been hiding, then pointed to himself and nodded. "Safe here." Ayana studied his face carefully, searching for any sign of deception. She had learned the hard way that not all white men could be trusted. But something in Thomas's weathered features suggested sincerity. Her baby's cries grew weaker, and she knew they both needed food and water soon. Thomas left the barn and returned minutes later with a wooden bucket of fresh water from his well, along with some bread and dried meat from his kitchen. He set these items down near Ayana, careful not to get too close and frighten her further. She drank gratefully, the cool water bringing immediate relief to her parched throat. As she ate, Thomas began preparing the horse's morning feed, going about his routine while stealing occasional glances at his unexpected guests. The baby had quieted after nursing, and Ayana seemed slightly more relaxed, though she remained alert to every sound and movement. Over the next few days, an unusual routine developed. Thomas would bring food and water to the barn each morning and evening, always announcing his presence before entering so as not to startle Ayana. She began to trust him enough to speak a few words in broken English, teaching him her name and her son's name, Dakota, which meant friend to everyone. Thomas learned fragments of Ayana's story during these brief encounters. Her husband had been killed during a raid by soldiers 6 months earlier. Their village had been burned and the survivors scattered. She had been traveling for weeks, trying to reach relatives who might have made it to a reservation in New Mexico, when exhaustion and hunger forced her to seek shelter. The isolation of Thomas's ranch worked in their favor. His nearest neighbor lived 5 miles away and visitors were rare. Ayana and Dakota could remain hidden in the barn without much risk of discovery, at least for now. But Thomas knew this arrangement couldn't continue indefinitely. On the 5th evening, as Thomas delivered their usual meal, he made a proposal that shocked them both. Speaking slowly in his limited Apache and broken English, he suggested something that seemed impossible. "You stay, always. Be my wife." Ayana stared at him in stunned silence. Marriage between Apache women and white men was not unheard of, but it was complicated and often dangerous. Such unions were looked upon with suspicion by both communities, and the legal implications were murky at best. Thomas tried to explain his reasoning. He was lonely, she needed protection, and her child needed a father. Together they could create a family and provide each other with companionship and security. It wasn't a romantic proposal, but rather a practical arrangement that could benefit them all. But Ayana's response was not what Thomas expected. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her voice rising with emotion. When she switched to English, her words were halting but clear. "You not know me. I not know you. Why you want Apache wife?" Thomas sat down on a bale of hay, maintaining a respectful distance. He spoke honestly about his loneliness since Sarah's death, about the empty house that echoed with memories, and about his growing affection for the brave young woman who had appeared in his barn. He also spoke practically about the protection marriage would offer her and Dakota. As a married woman, Ayana would have legal status that might protect her from being forcibly removed to a reservation. As Thomas's wife, she would be under his protection, and few people would dare challenge a rancher's right to defend his family. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it offered hope where none had existed before. Ayana listened carefully, weighing his words against her own desperate circumstances. She had witnessed the fate of other Apache women who had been captured and sent to reservations. Families were torn apart, children taken from their mothers, and traditional ways of life forbidden. The choice between an uncertain future with this strange white man and almost certain separation from her son was not difficult to make. That night, As Thomas returned to his empty house and Ayanna held her sleeping child in the hay-scented darkness of the barn, both struggled with the magnitude of the decision before them. Neither had expected to find themselves in such circumstances. But life had a way of presenting choices that changed everything. The next morning would bring Thomas's final ultimatum, though he didn't think of it in such terms. He simply knew that he couldn't continue to harbor fugitives indefinitely without facing serious consequences. The choice he would present to Ayanna would force them both to commit to a path that would test their courage, challenge their beliefs, and ultimately determine the course of their lives together. The morning of the 6th day brought an unexpected visitor that would force the decision neither Thomas nor Ayanna was quite ready to make. Sheriff William Porter arrived at the ranch just after sunrise, his horse kicking up dust clouds as he approached the main house. Thomas had been preparing breakfast when he spotted the lawman through his kitchen window. Thomas's heart pounded as he quickly walked to the barn, where he found Ayanna already gathering her few possessions, having heard the approaching hoofbeats. Her eyes were filled with resigned determination, and she clutched baby Dakota tightly to her chest. She had lived as a fugitive long enough to recognize the sound of authority approaching. "Sheriff coming," Thomas whispered urgently. "Hide deep in hay. Stay silent no matter what happens." Ayanna nodded and disappeared into the darkest corner of the barn, burrowing deep into the loose hay with her child. Thomas scattered fresh hay over the area, then grabbed a pitchfork and began mucking out the horse stalls, trying to appear as if he were going about his normal morning routine. Sheriff Porter dismounted and approached the barn with the casual confidence of a man accustomed to being welcomed wherever he went. He was a tall, weathered man in his 50s who had been keeping the peace in this part of Texas for over a decade. Thomas had always gotten along well with him, but today every word would carry the weight of life and death. "Morning, Tom," the sheriff called out cheerfully. "Heard there might be some Apache activity in the area. Thought I'd check in with the outlying ranches. Make sure everyone's staying vigilant." Thomas forced himself to continue working as he responded. "Haven't seen anything unusual, Bill. Been pretty quiet out here lately." The lie came easier than he had expected, though his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the pitchfork. Porter walked through the barn, examining the stalls and storage areas with a practiced eye. Thomas's heart nearly stopped when the sheriff paused near the corner where Ayanna was hiding. But the lawman was simply admiring Ranger, Thomas's favorite stallion. "Fine horse you got there," Porter commented. "How's he working out for you?" The two men talked horses and cattle for several minutes, while Thomas fought to keep his voice steady and natural. In the hay, Ayanna held her breath and kept Dakota pressed close to her chest, praying the baby wouldn't cry. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Sheriff Porter finally prepared to leave. "You keep your eyes open, Tom. Word is there's a young Apache woman traveling with a baby, probably heading toward New Mexico territory. Could be dangerous if she's desperate enough." Thomas nodded gravely, walking the sheriff to his horse. "I'll be careful, Bill. Thanks for the warning." As soon as Porter disappeared over the hill, Thomas rushed back to the barn where he found Ayanna emerging from her hiding place, hay clinging to her hair and clothing. The baby was fussing, and she looked shaken by how close they had come to discovery. "This cannot continue," Thomas said firmly, though not unkindly. "Today you must choose. Come with me to the house as my wife, or take your chances on the trail. But you cannot stay hidden in my barn any longer." Ayanna looked around the barn that had been her refuge for nearly a week. She thought about the long, uncertain journey that still lay ahead if she chose to leave, about the dangers that awaited a lone Apache woman traveling with an infant. Then she looked at Thomas Mackenzie, this strange white man who had shown her kindness when he could have easily turned her over to the authorities. "If I say yes," she asked carefully in her improving English, "what do you expect from wife?" Thomas had been thinking about this question for days. "I expect companionship, help with the house and cooking, and care for each other when we are sick or hurt. I will provide for you and Dakota, protect you both, and treat you with respect." He paused, then added honestly, "I hope that in time, we might come to care for each other as husband and wife should." Ayanna appreciated his honesty. Many men would have made promises they had no intention of keeping, or demanded things she was not prepared to give. "And if I am not good wife? If I make mistakes with your white man ways? Then we will learn together," Thomas replied. "I know nothing about Apache ways either. We both must be patient and teach each other." The young woman studied his weathered face, searching for any sign of deception or hidden cruelty. In her tribe, marriages were often arranged, and love was something that grew over time rather than something that existed before the union. What Thomas offered was not so different from what she might have expected in her old life, except for the vast cultural differences they would need to navigate. Baby Dakota began to cry, and Ayanna realized she was out of options. The sheriff's visit had made it clear that staying hidden was no longer possible. She could continue running with no guarantee of reaching safety. Or she could accept Thomas's offer and try to build a new life from the ashes of her old one. "I will be your wife," she said quietly, then repeated it in Apache before adding, "But first, you must understand something about me." Thomas waited as she gathered her thoughts, choosing her words carefully in English. "I am daughter of War Chief. I know how to fight, how to heal, how to survive. I will not be weak wife who hides in house. If you want Apache wife, you get Apache strength too." Thomas smiled for the first time in days. "I wouldn't want you any other way." That afternoon they walked together from the barn to the house, Ayanna carrying Dakota and a small bundle containing her few possessions. As they crossed the threshold, both understood they were stepping into an unknown future that would test everything they thought they knew about love, family, and survival. The first weeks of their marriage were filled with awkward moments and cultural misunderstandings that sometimes led to frustration, but more often to unexpected laughter. Thomas had converted his spare bedroom into a nursery for baby Dakota, while Ayanna took the bedroom that had once belonged to him, and his late wife Sarah, Thomas, moved his belongings to the small room off the kitchen that he used as an office. Ayanna's first challenge came with the kitchen stove, a massive iron contraption that seemed determined to resist her efforts to cook anything edible. She was accustomed to cooking over open fires, where she could control the heat by moving pots closer to or farther from the flames. The stove's dampers and flues were mysteries that produced either barely warm food or charcoal that had once been meat. Thomas found her one morning standing before the stove with her hands on her hips, speaking to it in rapid Apache in what was clearly an unflattering manner. Smoke poured from the oven, and the acrid smell of burned biscuits filled the kitchen. "Maybe I should teach you about the stove," Thomas suggested gently, trying not to smile at the sight of his formidable wife being defeated by kitchen equipment. Ayanna turned to him with exasperation written across her face. "Your firebox has evil spirit," she declared. "It does not listen to reason." Thomas spent the next hour teaching her about drafts and dampers, about how to bank coals for slow cooking, and how to stoke the fire for high heat. Ayanna proved to be a quick learner, and within days she was producing meals that combined her traditional Apache recipes with ingredients from Thomas's pantry, creating flavors he had never experienced. In return, Ayanna taught Thomas things he had never expected to learn. She showed him how to read weather signs that his white neighbors missed, how to find water in drought conditions, and how to prepare medicines from plants that grew wild on his own land. Her knowledge of herbs and healing impressed him greatly, especially when she successfully treated a cut on his hand that had been slow to heal. "Apache women learn many things," she explained as she applied a poultice made from prairie sage and other plants she had gathered. "We must know how to keep family alive when men are away hunting or fighting." The biggest challenge came with the outside world. Thomas knew that introducing Ayanna as his wife would create gossip and possibly hostility among his neighbors. He decided to start with the most important relationship first, the town doctor, who would need to examine both Ayanna and Dakota to ensure they were healthy. Dr. Samuel Harrison had been practicing medicine in the territory for 15 years and had seen every kind of unusual situation imaginable. When Thomas brought his new family to town, the doctor examined them professionally, asked no unnecessary questions, and provided the documentation that would be needed for legal purposes. "Your wife appears to be in good health, considering what she's been through," Dr. Harrison told Thomas privately. "The boy is thriving. They're both lucky to have found you." The next test came when Thomas needed supplies from the general store. He left Ayanna and Dakota at home for this first trip, wanting to gauge the town's reaction before exposing them to potential hostility. Store owner Marcus Webb greeted Thomas with barely concealed curiosity. "Heard you got married, Tom," Webb said with the casual tone of a man fishing for information. "Congratulations. When do we get to meet the new Mrs. Mackenzie?" Soon, Thomas replied non-committally, focusing on his supply list. But he could feel the weight of Webb's stare and knew that news of his marriage had already spread through the small community. Back at the ranch, Thomas shared his concerns with Ayanna. Some people in town may not be friendly at first, he warned her. There are those who don't trust Apache people, and others who don't approve of marriages between different races. Ayanna nodded thoughtfully. In my village, there were also people who did not trust whites. Fear makes people say stupid things. I am not afraid of stupid people. Her confidence impressed Thomas, but he still worried about how the community would receive them. His concerns proved justified when Sheriff Porter returned to the ranch 3 weeks later, this time with a more serious expression on his weathered face. Tom, I need to ask you about something. Porter began without his usual pleasantries. There's been talk in town about you having an Apache woman living here. Some folks are concerned. Thomas had been preparing for this conversation since the day he'd made his proposal to Ayanna. Bill, I'd like you to meet my wife, Ayanna Mackenzie, and her son, Dakota. He had coached Ayanna on how to handle this meeting, and she appeared in the doorway wearing one of Sarah's dresses that she had altered to fit her smaller frame. Ma'am, Sheriff Porter touched his hat brim politely, though his eyes remained wary. I suppose congratulations are in order. Ayanna inclined her head gracefully. Thank you, Sheriff Porter. My husband has told me you are a good friend to him. The formality of her English and the dignity of her bearing seemed to surprise the lawman. This was not the desperate fugitive he had been tracking, but a composed woman who carried herself with quiet authority. I trust there won't be any problems, Porter said, his tone making it clear that this was both a statement and a warning. Thomas met his gaze steadily. None at all, Bill. Ayanna is my wife, Dakota is my son, and this is their home. Anyone who has a problem with that will have to take it up with me directly. After Porter left, Ayanna asked Thomas what he had meant by his final statement. Thomas explained that he was prepared to defend his family against anyone who might threaten them, regardless of their race or position in the community. You would fight your own people for us? She asked, clearly moved by his declaration. You are my people now, Thomas replied simply. You and Dakota are my family, and family protects each other. That night, as they sat by the fireplace after putting Dakota to bed, Ayanna spoke quietly about her growing feelings for the man who had risked everything to give her and her son a home. I think maybe we will be happy together, Thomas Mackenzie, she said, using his full name as she did when she was being particularly serious. Thomas reached over and took her hand, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. I think so too, Ayanna Mackenzie. 6 months into their marriage, Thomas and Ayanna had developed a rhythm that surprised them both with its natural ease. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, with Ayanna's knowledge of natural remedies proving invaluable when cattle fell sick, and her ability to predict weather patterns helping Thomas make better decisions about when to move livestock or harvest crops. Baby Dakota had grown into a chubby, happy child who delighted in crawling around the kitchen, while Ayanna cooked and babbling in a mixture of Apache and English words. Thomas found himself completely enchanted with the boy, spending evenings teaching him simple English words while Ayanna shared Apache songs and stories that had been passed down through generations. The real test of their growing bond came when Ayanna announced she was pregnant with Thomas's child. She had suspected for weeks but waited until she was certain before sharing the news. She chose a quiet evening when Dakota was already asleep and Thomas was reading by the fireplace. Thomas, she said, settling into the chair across from him with uncharacteristic nervousness, I have something important to tell you. He looked up from his book, immediately alert to the serious tone in her voice. In the months they had lived together, he had learned to read her moods and expressions with growing accuracy. I carry your child, she said simply, her hands instinctively moving to rest on her still flat stomach. Thomas stared at her for a long moment, the book forgotten in his lap. When the meaning of her words fully registered, his face broke into a smile that transformed his entire appearance. A baby? Our baby? Ayanna nodded, relief flooding through her at his obvious joy. Are you happy about this? Thomas rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands in his. Ayanna, I'm more than happy. I don't have words for how this makes me feel. The pregnancy brought them closer together in ways neither had anticipated. Thomas became protective in a gentle way that touched Ayanna's heart. insisting on taking over the heavier household chores and worrying when she worked too long in the garden. Ayanna, meanwhile, began teaching Thomas more Apache words and customs, explaining that their child should know both sides of their heritage. "Our baby will be Apache and white," she told him one evening, as they walked around the property together, Dakota riding contentedly on Thomas's shoulders. Child must know both worlds to survive in either one. Thomas agreed wholeheartedly, though he worried about the challenges their mixed heritage child would face. "It won't be easy for him or her," he said honestly. "Some people from both sides might not accept them." Ayanna stopped walking and turned to face him. "Then we make them strong enough that it doesn't matter what other people think. We teach them to be proud of who they are." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Martha Coleman, the wife of a neighboring rancher, accompanied by 2 other ladies from town. The women had clearly come on a mission, and their stiff postures suggested it wasn't a friendly social call. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mackenzie," Martha said formally, pointedly not acknowledging Ayanna's presence. "We've come to discuss a matter of some importance to the community." Thomas felt Ayanna tense beside him, but when he glanced at her, her expression remained calm and dignified. Dakota babbled happily from his perch on Thomas's shoulders, oblivious to the tension in the air. "What can I help you with, ladies?" Thomas asked, though he suspected he knew what was coming. Martha Coleman drew herself up to her full height. "It's come to our attention that you're living in sin with this person," she said, her distaste evident in every word. "The decent women of this community cannot stand by and watch such behavior corrupt our town." Thomas felt his temper rise, but Ayanna's gentle touch on his arm reminded him to stay calm. "Mrs. Coleman, I'd like you to meet my wife, Ayanna Mackenzie. We were married 6 months ago by Justice Williams in the county seat, and our marriage is legal in every respect." The women exchanged glances, clearly having expected a different response. Martha Coleman's companion, Mrs. Patricia Hayes, stepped forward. "Even if that's true, surely you can understand our concerns about the influence such an arrangement might have on our children and community." Before Thomas could respond, Ayanna spoke for herself, her English clear and precise. "Mrs. Coleman, Mrs. Hayes," she said, nodding to each woman in turn. "I understand that my presence here makes you uncomfortable. But I am Thomas's wife, this is our home, and we harm no one. I ask only that you judge us by our actions, not by your fears." Her dignified response seemed to surprise the women, who had perhaps expected something very different from an Apache woman. Martha Coleman struggled for words, clearly having prepared for a different kind of confrontation. "Well," she finally said, "I suppose time will tell whether this arrangement brings trouble to our community." After the women left, Thomas apologized to Ayanna for their rudeness. "I'm sorry you had to endure that," he said, still angry at their treatment of his wife. Ayanna shrugged, philosophical. "They are afraid because they do not know me. Fear makes people cruel sometimes. When they see that we are good neighbors, some will change their minds. Others will not. We cannot control what others think, only how we act." Her wisdom and grace in handling the situation made Thomas fall a little more in love with her. As the months passed, some neighbors did indeed warm to Ayanna, particularly after she helped deliver Mrs. Patterson's baby when the doctor couldn't reach their remote ranch in time, and when she successfully treated several cases of fever using her traditional medicines. By the time their daughter was born the following spring, a healthy, beautiful baby girl with her mother's dark hair and her father's green eyes, the Mackenzie family had earned a place in the community through their actions rather than their acceptance. They named her Hope because she represented everything good about their future together. As Thomas held his newborn daughter while Ayanna rested and Dakota peered curiously at his new sister, he marveled at how much his life had changed since that morning when he'd discovered a frightened young woman hiding in his barn. What had begun as an act of simple human kindness had grown into something much more precious. A real family built on love, respect, and shared dreams for the future. 2 years after baby Hope's birth, the Mackenzie family had become an integral part of their Texas community, though their journey to acceptance hadn't always been smooth. Thomas and Ayanna had weathered suspicious glances, whispered gossip, and occasional outright hostility with grace and determination, always responding to prejudice with dignity and kindness. Their ranch had prospered beyond Thomas's wildest dreams. Ayanna's knowledge of native plants and natural cycles had helped him make improvements he never would have thought of on his own. She had established medicinal gardens that attracted people from neighboring towns, seeking remedies for ailments that traditional medicine couldn't cure. Her reputation as a healer grew steadily, bringing respect and acceptance that social calls had failed to achieve. 4-year-old Dakota had grown into a confident, bilingual child who charmed everyone he met with his ready smile and natural curiosity. He helped his stepfather with ranch work, already showing an intuitive understanding of horses that impressed even the most experienced cowboys. Thomas had legally adopted him, making him Dakota Mackenzie in name as well as in heart. Little Hope, now an energetic 2-year-old with her mother's fierce independence and her father's stubborn streak, delighted in following her big brother everywhere and speaking a creative mixture of Apache, English, and toddler gibberish that somehow everyone in the family understood perfectly. The family's peace was tested one autumn day when a group of Apache warriors appeared at the edge of the property. Ayanna spotted them first from the kitchen window and Thomas saw her freeze, her hand instinctively moving to cover her mouth in shock. When he followed her gaze, he understood immediately why she was frightened. "Do you know them?" he asked quietly, moving to stand beside her. Ayanna nodded slowly. "The tall one on the black horse is my brother Nalnish. I have not seen him since much," she trailed off. But Thomas knew she meant since before her husband's death and her desperate flight from the destroyed village. Thomas watched as the warriors approached the house, noting their painted faces and the tension in their postures. "What do they want?" "They come to take me home," Ayanna said with certainty. "My brother would have been searching for me all this time. He probably thinks I was captured or killed." The Apache warriors stopped 50 yards from the house and Nalnish called out in his native language. Ayanna answered through the open window, and Thomas listened to the rapid exchange without understanding the words but clearly hearing the emotion in both voices. "What is he saying?" Thomas asked. Ayanna's eyes filled with tears. "He says our people have found a place where we can live in peace. He wants me to come with them, to bring the children and leave this life behind." She paused, wiping her eyes. "He says I belong with my own people." Thomas felt his heart sink, though he tried not to let his fear show. "And what do you want to do?" Before Ayanna could answer, Dakota came running into the kitchen, followed by Hope toddle-walking as fast as her little legs could carry her. The children had heard the unfamiliar voices and were curious about the visitors. "Mama, who are those men?" Dakota asked, pressing his face to the window to get a better look. Ayanna knelt down to her children's level. "That is your Uncle Nalnish, your mother's brother. He has come a very long way to find us." Nalnish called out again, more insistently this time. Ayanna looked at Thomas with anguish written across her face. "I must go speak with him." "He will not leave until I do." Thomas nodded. "We'll all go. Whatever you decide, we face it as a family." They walked out to meet the warriors together, Thomas carrying Hope while Dakota held tightly to his stepfather's hand. Nalnish's eyes moved from his sister to the white man beside her, then to the two children, taking in every detail of their appearance and body language. The conversation that followed was conducted primarily in Apache, with Ayanna occasionally translating for Thomas's benefit. Nalnish spoke urgently about the new reservation where their remaining people had settled, about the need for families to stay together, and about his duty to bring his sister home. But when he demanded that Ayanna leave immediately with the children, she surprised everyone, including Thomas, with the firmness of her response. "I am home," she said in clear English, ensuring that both. 2 years after baby Hope's birth, the Mackenzie family had become an integral part of their Texas community, though their journey to acceptance hadn't always been smooth. Thomas and Ayanna had weathered suspicious glances, whispered gossip, and occasional outright hostility with grace and determination, always responding to prejudice with dignity and kindness. Their ranch had prospered beyond Thomas's wildest dreams. Ayanna's knowledge of native plants and natural cycles had helped him make improvements he never would have thought of on his own. She had established medicinal gardens that attracted people from neighboring towns, seeking remedies for ailments that traditional medicine couldn't cure. Her reputation as a healer grew steadily, bringing respect and acceptance that social calls had failed to achieve. 4-year-old Dakota had grown into a confident, bilingual child who charmed everyone he met with his ready smile and natural curiosity. He helped his stepfather with ranch work, already showing an intuitive understanding of horses that impressed even the most experienced cowboys. Thomas had legally adopted him, making him Dakota Mackenzie in name as well as in heart. Little Hope, now an energetic 2-year-old with her mother's fierce independence and her father's stubborn streak, delighted in following her big brother everywhere and speaking a creative mixture of Apache, English, and toddler gibberish that somehow everyone in the family understood perfectly. The family's peace was tested one autumn day when a group of Apache warriors appeared at the edge of the property. Ayanna spotted them first from the kitchen window, and Thomas saw her freeze, her hand instinctively moving to cover her mouth in shock. When he followed her gaze, he understood immediately why she was frightened. "Do you know them?" he asked quietly, moving to stand beside her. Ayanna nodded slowly. "The tall one on the black horse is my brother Nalnish. I have not seen him since," she trailed off. But Thomas knew she meant since before her husband's death and her desperate flight from the destroyed village. Thomas watched as the warriors approached the house, noting their painted faces and the tension in their postures. "What do they want?" "They come to take me home," Ayanna said with certainty. "My brother would have been searching for me all this time. He probably thinks I was captured or killed." The Apache warriors stopped 50 yards from the house, and Nalnish called out in his native language. Ayanna answered through the open window, and Thomas listened to the rapid exchange without understanding the words but clearly hearing the emotion in both voices. "What is he saying?" Thomas asked. Ayanna's eyes filled with tears. "He says our people have found a place where we can live in peace. He wants me to come with them, to bring the children and leave this life behind." She paused, wiping her eyes. "He says I belong with my own people." Thomas felt his heart sink, though he tried not to let his fear show. "And what do you want to do?" Before Ayanna could answer, Dakota came running into the kitchen, followed by Hope toddle walking as fast as her little legs could carry her. The children had heard the unfamiliar voices and were curious about the visitors. "Mama, who are those men?" Dakota asked, pressing his face to the window to get a better look. Ayanna knelt down to her children's level. "That is your Uncle Nalnish, your mother's brother. He has come a very long way to find us." Nalnish called out again, more insistently this time. Ayanna looked at Thomas with anguish written across her face. "I must go speak with him. He will not leave until I do." Thomas nodded. "We'll all go. Whatever you decide, we face it as a family." They walked out to meet the warriors together, Thomas carrying Hope while Dakota held tightly to his stepfather's hand. Nalnish's eyes moved from his sister to the white man beside her, then to the two children, taking in every detail of their appearance and body language. The conversation that followed was conducted primarily in Apache, with Ayanna occasionally translating for Thomas's benefit. Nalnish spoke urgently about the new reservation where their remaining people had settled, about the need for families to stay together, and about his duty to bring his sister home. But when he demanded that Ayanna leave immediately with the children, she surprised everyone, including Thomas, with the firmness of her response. "I am home," she said in clear English, ensuring that both her brother and her husband could understand her words. "This man is my husband, these children are our children, and this land is our home. I will not abandon my family." Nalnish's face hardened at her words. He spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing toward the house and then toward Thomas with obvious disapproval. Ayanna's responses grew equally heated, and Thomas could see that this was becoming more than just a family disagreement. "What is he saying now?" Thomas asked quietly. "He says I have forgotten who I am, that I have become white and lost my Apache spirit," Ayanna replied, her voice tight with emotion. "He says the children will grow up not knowing their true heritage." Thomas stepped forward, still holding Hope, and addressed Nalnish directly despite the language barrier. "I may not speak your language, but I want you to know that I love and respect your sister. She has taught our children about their Apache heritage, and they are proud of who they are." Ayanna translated Thomas's words, adding her own passionate defense of the life they had built together. She spoke about the respect she had earned in the community, about the healing work she did, that honored the traditions her grandmother had taught her, and about the love that had grown between her and Thomas. The standoff continued for nearly an hour, with other warriors growing restless and the children sensing the tension, even if they didn't understand its source. Finally, Nalnish made a declaration that caused Ayanna to gasp and step back. "What did he say?" Thomas demanded, seeing the shock on his wife's face. "He says if I will not come willingly, he will take the children by force. He says Dakota especially belongs with the Apache people, not living as a white man's son." Thomas felt a surge of protective fury unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Over my dead body," he said grimly, setting Hope down behind him and moving to shield both children. Ayanna quickly translated his words, and the tension in the air became almost unbearable. Several of the warriors reached for their weapons while Thomas calculated the distance to his rifle, which hung just inside the front door. But it was Dakota who broke the dangerous stalemate. The 4-year-old boy stepped out from behind Thomas and walked directly toward his Apache uncle, showing no fear despite the painted faces and weapons of the warriors. "Uncle Nalnish," he said in clear Apache, having learned the language from his mother's bedtime stories and songs. "I am Dakota Mackenzie. This is my Papa Thomas, this is my Mama Ayanna, and this is my sister Hope. We are a family." The simplicity and courage of the child's words seemed to pierce through the anger and cultural conflicts that had driven the adults to the brink of violence. Nalnish looked down at his nephew, seeing in the boy's face a mixture of Apache and white features, but also seeing something else: confidence, love, and a sense of belonging that couldn't be faked or forced. Ayanna seized the moment, kneeling beside her son and speaking to her brother with quiet intensity. She told him about Thomas's kindness when she was desperate and alone, about the home they had built together, and about the grandchildren he would never know if he took them away by force. "Look at them, brother," she said, gesturing to Hope, who was clinging to Thomas's leg, and Dakota, who stood between the two worlds with remarkable composure. "They are healthy, happy, and loved. They know Apache songs and stories, but they also know how to read and write in English. They have the best of both worlds." Nalnish studied his sister's face for a long moment, then looked at Thomas with new eyes. He saw a man who was clearly prepared to fight and die for his family, but also a man who had stepped back when the child approached, showing respect for the boy's courage and the family bond. Finally, the Apache warrior spoke, and his words surprised everyone. Through Ayanna's translation, he said, "I came here expecting to find my sister living as a prisoner or a slave. Instead, I find her living as a queen of her own domain. I came expecting to find her children stolen from their heritage, but I see they carry both bloodlines with honor." He paused, then continued, "I will not take you from this place, sister, but I ask that you remember us and that you teach your children about their Apache ancestors. The blood of warriors flows in their veins, and they should know the stories of their people." Ayanna wept with relief as she embraced her brother, and Thomas felt his knees nearly buckle with the release of tension. The children, sensing that the danger had passed, ran to their parents for comfort and reassurance. Before leaving, Nalnish gave Dakota a small carved horse and Hope a beaded bracelet that had belonged to their grandmother. He also presented Thomas with a beautifully crafted knife, saying through Ayanna, "For the man who protects my sister and raises Apache children with honor." As the warriors rode away across the prairie, Thomas put his arms around his family and marveled once again at the incredible journey that had brought them together. What had begun with a desperate woman hiding in his barn had grown into something stronger than cultural differences, stronger than prejudice, and stronger than the forces that might have torn them apart. "Are you sorry you stayed?" Thomas asked Ayanna as they watched her brother disappear over the horizon. She looked up at him with eyes full of love and certainty. "This is where I belong," she said firmly. "With you, with our children, in the home we built together. My brother was right about one thing. I am a queen here. Queen of my own life and my own choices." That evening, as they tucked the children into bed and Hope played with her new bracelet while Dakota galloped his carved horse across the blankets, Thomas and Ayanna reflected on how far they had all come. "Do you think the children will understand someday?" Thomas asked. "About how we came to be a family?" Ayanna smiled, thinking of the story they would tell their children and grandchildren about the Apache woman who was discovered hiding in a barn, and the rancher who said she could stay if she remained as his wife. "They will understand that love comes in many forms," she said, "and that families are built not just on blood but on choice, commitment, and the courage to protect what matters most." Outside their window, the Texas stars shone down on the Mackenzie Ranch, where an unlikely family had found their way to happiness through kindness, understanding, and the simple recognition that love knows no boundaries of race, culture, or circumstance. Their story would become legend in their community, a testament to the power of human connection to overcome even the greatest obstacles.